Please leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories. Let's get into the story. Rita sat alone in the dimly lit bedroom, her hand resting gently on her swollen belly. The once lively and warm home had long turned into a prison of pain and loneliness. Her husband, James Kenneth, barely acknowledged her presence anymore. To him, she was nothing but a mistake, a woman he had married out of obligation rather than love. Rita had tried everything to make their marriage work, enduring every cold shoulder, every insult, and every night spent crying herself to sleep. Yet, nothing she did could soften James' heart toward her. He had made it clear from the very beginning, he never wanted her. The only thing that kept her going was the tiny life growing inside her. But even that meant nothing to James. He refused to acknowledge the child, treating her pregnancy with complete indifference. James had eyes only for one woman, Victoria. She was beautiful, confident, and, unlike Rita, she had his undivided attention. He showered her with gifts, attention, and public affection while treating Rita like an unwanted guest in his own home. Rita had seen them together countless times, James holding Victoria's hand, kissing her forehead, whispering sweet words into her ear. It broke her heart, but what hurt the most was how openly they flaunted their relationship in front of her. James did not even try to hide it. To him, Rita's feelings did not matter. His affair with Victoria was not a secret, it was a declaration. Victoria herself enjoyed tormenting Rita, making sure she felt every bit of her insignificance. On the rare occasions James did speak to Rita, it was filled with nothing but resentment. "You are a curse in my life," he spat at her one evening as she timidly tried to remind him about their upcoming doctor's appointment. "I don't know why I ever married you." His words cut deeper than any wound ever could, but Rita had learned not to cry in front of him anymore. Crying only made him angrier. Instead, she kept her pain bottled up, pretending that she was fine when, in reality, she was slowly dying inside. Every kick from her unborn child was a reminder of the life she was bringing into such a toxic environment. She feared for her baby, for the kind of father James would be, if he ever even acknowledged the child at all. Despite everything, Rita still hoped that one day, James would change. Maybe he would finally look at her and see the woman who loved him unconditionally. Maybe he would hold their child and realize what a blessing they had been given. But deep down, she knew better. James had made up his mind a long time ago, he would never love her. And as long as Victoria was in his life, there was no place for Rita in his heart. But what she did not know was that her life was about to take a devastating turn, one that would shatter her heart beyond repair. James Kenneth sat in his lavish living room, his arm lazily draped around Victoria's shoulders as she scrolled through her phone, laughing at something. Rita, his heavily pregnant wife, stood in the doorway, her heart sinking as she watched them. She had grown accustomed to being ignored, but each time she saw them together, it was like reopening an old wound. Victoria's presence in their home was a constant reminder that she was unwanted. Unlike Rita, who had once dreamed of a loving marriage, Victoria had no illusions. She was there for James' wealth, and she made no effort to hide it. Every expensive gift, every public display of affection, and every moment of James' attention was proof of her victory over Rita. "And she enjoyed rubbing it in. You're still standing there?" Victoria scoffed, not even looking up from her phone. "James, why do you even let this thing stay here? She's nothing but bad luck." James barely reacted, taking a sip of his whiskey before turning his cold eyes to Rita. "Why are you staring at us?" he asked bitterly. "Can't you go find something useful to do instead of sulking around like a ghost?" Rita felt the sting of his words, but she refused to cry. She had learned that tears only fueled their cruelty. Taking a deep breath, she turned to leave, but Victoria wasn't done yet. "You should be grateful James even lets you breathe in this house," she sneered. "If I were him, I'd have thrown you out long ago." James chuckled, running a hand through Victoria's hair as if rewarding her for her words. "You're right," he murmured. "But she's too pitiful. Watching her suffer is actually entertaining." The level of humiliation Rita endured on a daily basis was unbearable, yet she had nowhere to go. She had no family to turn to, no job to support herself, and no one to fight for her. The only thing that kept her in that house was the baby in her womb. But James had no attachment to their child. He refused to acknowledge it, refused to accompany her to any hospital checkups, and refused to even speak about it. Meanwhile, Victoria was also pregnant, and James treated her like a queen. Every doctor's visit, every craving, and every need was met with immediate attention. He pampered her endlessly, never allowing her to lift a finger. The contrast between how he treated the two pregnant women in his life was staggering. Rita had once prayed that carrying his child would soften his heart toward her, but it only made his hatred grow. Late at night, while lying in bed alone, Rita wondered how she had ended up in this nightmare of a marriage. She had once loved James with all her heart, believing he was the man of her dreams. But she was nothing more than a pawn in his twisted game, a woman forced to endure humiliation while he paraded his mistress around like a trophy. As she felt the baby kick inside her, she whispered, "I promise I'll protect you, even if I have to do it alone." But she had no idea that the worst was yet to come. Rita sat alone in her dimly lit bedroom, her hand gently resting on her swollen belly. The baby kicked softly, a faint reminder that she was not alone, even though it felt that way. She had imagined a different kind of pregnancy, one filled with love, excitement, and the gentle touch of a caring husband. Instead, she had spent the past months in isolation, enduring James' open disdain. The weight of her situation bore down on her, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to cry. Would her child ever know love in a home filled with so much hatred? Would James ever look at their baby and feel even an ounce of warmth? Deep down, she already knew the answer. Meanwhile, in the luxurious living room, James and Victoria were celebrating their own pregnancy. James sat beside Victoria, holding her hand as they flipped through a baby catalog, discussing cribs, baby clothes, and toys. He was completely invested in the child she carried, despite never questioning if it was truly his. "I want only the best for our baby," Victoria purred, tilting her head dramatically. "Unlike some children who bring nothing but bad luck." James smirked at her words, his mind instantly thinking of Rita's unborn child. He had never wanted that baby, and he certainly had no intention of treating it as his own. To him, Rita was a burden, a mistake he was forced to live with. His only regret was not getting rid of her sooner. Days turned into weeks, and Rita's condition worsened. She was exhausted, struggling with morning sickness, dizziness, and overwhelming stress. Yet, James refused to acknowledge her struggles. He never accompanied her to the hospital, never asked how she was feeling, and never once placed a hand on her stomach to feel the life growing inside. When Victoria so much as sneezed, James would drop everything to tend to her, but when Rita fainted from exhaustion one evening, he merely stepped over her body, muttering that she was too dramatic. His cruelty knew no bounds. It wasn't just indifference, it was pure, calculated hatred. And Rita had no idea why. One evening, as Rita sat in the dining room eating alone, James walked in, dressed in an expensive suit. "I'm taking Victoria shopping," he announced, as if she cared. Rita looked up, her voice soft but firm. "James, I'm due in a few weeks." "Shouldn't we?" he cut her off with a scoff. "You think I have time to waste on a child I never wanted? Handle your pregnancy yourself." With that, he walked out, leaving Rita to stare at the untouched food on her plate. She felt her heart shatter all over again. Rita's feet ached as she trudged down the road, the sun scorching her skin. She had heard James mention the mall he was taking Victoria to, and though she knew she wasn't welcome, something in her told her she needed to go. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was hope that seeing her might stir something in his heart. She had no car, no money for a cab, and no one to ask for help. So she walked, step by agonizing step, ignoring the pain that shot up her legs. She could feel people's eyes on her, but she didn't care. She wasn't doing this for herself, she was doing it for her baby. At the mall, James pulled up in his luxury car, stepping out with a smug grin. "Stay in the car," he told Victoria, placing a soft kiss on her forehead. "I'll be back with everything we need for our baby." Victoria beamed, feeling victorious as she watched James disappear into the mall. But just as she was about to relax, her eyes landed on a familiar figure entering the parking lot, Rita. Her face twisted into a cruel smirk. This was an opportunity she couldn't waste. She stepped out of the car, making a show of stretching dramatically before striding toward Rita with mock concern. "Oh, look who it is," she sneered. "The unfortunate wife." Rita clenched her fists, trying to walk past Victoria, but the woman wasn't done tormenting her. "What are you doing here?" Victoria continued, her voice laced with venom. "Looking for pity, or did you finally accept that James will never love you?" Rita took a deep breath, willing herself not to react, but then Victoria said the one thing that shattered her restraint. "You should just disappear. James doesn't need your cursed baby." Before Rita could respond, Victoria let out a loud, piercing scream and fell to the ground, clutching her stomach as if in pain. It all happened so fast. People turned to look. Then, James appeared. His eyes went wide at the sight of Victoria on the floor, and without thinking, he ran toward them. "What did you do?" he roared, his voice filled with rage. Rita opened her mouth to defend herself, but before she could get a word out, James pushed her, hard. Victoria lay on the ground, whimpering dramatically as a small crowd began gathering around. Her hand clutched her stomach, and she gasped as if she were in excruciating pain. "My baby," she whimpered, her voice breaking. James turned to her, his eyes wild with panic, completely ignoring Rita. "Victoria, are you okay? What happened?" he asked, kneeling beside her, stroking her hair. Rita stood there, frozen in disbelief. She hadn't even touched Victoria. The woman had thrown herself on the ground the moment she saw James approaching. But before she could defend herself, Victoria's trembling voice broke the tension. She pushed me," Victoria sobbed, pointing at Rita. "She doesn't want me to have my baby, James. She wants to get rid of it because she knows you love me more than her." James' expression darkened instantly. His jaw clenched, and his hands balled into fists. His gaze shifted toward Rita, who stared back at him, her eyes wide with shock and hurt. "You monster," James growled, rising to his feet. "You dare try to hurt Victoria's baby?" Rita's heart pounded in her chest. "James, I swear on my life, I did nothing." "She's lying," she pleaded, but James was too blinded by anger to listen. He was already stepping toward her, his face twisted with rage. "I should have left you a long time ago," he spat. "You're nothing but a bitter, jealous woman." The onlookers whispered among themselves, but no one intervened as James' anger boiled over. And then, in a fit of uncontrollable rage, he did the unthinkable, he shoved Rita with all his strength. The world blurred as Rita's body hit the ground with a sickening thud. Pain shot through her back, her stomach, her entire being. A sharp cry escaped her lips as she felt something inside her twist in agony. Gasps erupted from the small crowd, but no one moved to help her. James stood there, his chest heaving, his eyes filled with nothing but disgust. Rita clutched her stomach, fear clawing at her heart. Something was wrong. A searing pain pulsed through her body, and a horrifying realization crept in. Her baby. A sharp, unbearable cramp gripped her, and then, she felt it. Warm liquid pooled beneath her. Blood. Her vision swam as dizziness took over, and her breath came in short gasps. She was losing her baby. "James," her voice was weak, almost a whisper. "Please help me," but James didn't move. Instead, he scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Don't act like you're dying," he sneered. "I don't care what happens to you anymore." His words struck deeper than any physical wound, and as he turned his back on her, Rita felt the last shred of hope slip away. The crowd remained frozen, some watching with pity, others shaking their heads. But before she lost consciousness, a new voice cut through the chaos. "What the hell is going on here?" The deep, commanding voice sent a shiver through Rita's failing body. And then, everything went dark. When Rita opened her eyes, she was no longer on the hard, unforgiving pavement. She was in a hospital bed, the sterile scent of antiseptic filling the air. The bright white light stung her eyes, and for a moment, she was confused. But then, the pain in her abdomen reminded her of everything. The mall. James. The fall. Her baby. Panic surged through her, and she sat up abruptly, ignoring the sharp ache that shot through her body. A deep voice spoke beside her, calming yet firm. "You're awake," the man said. She turned her head and met the piercing gaze of Kingsley Donald. He was tall, with an air of authority and confidence, dressed in an expensive suit. Rita didn't know who he was, but she could tell just by looking at him that he was someone important. "Who are you?" she croaked, her throat dry and sore. Kingsley's face softened. "I saw what happened at the mall. I couldn't stand by and watch that bastard treat you like that." His voice was filled with controlled anger, and for the first time in years, Rita saw genuine concern in a man's eyes. But she didn't care about that right now. She needed to know. "My baby," she whispered, fear gripping her heart. "Is my baby okay?" Kingsley hesitated, and that hesitation alone was enough to break her. Tears welled up in her eyes as she gripped the hospital sheets. She already knew the answer before he said it. "I'm sorry," Kingsley said softly. "You lost the baby." Rita lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling utterly empty. The sterile smell of disinfectant filled her nostrils, but it did nothing to numb the pain coursing through her. She had lost the one thing she had endured so much for, her baby. The doctor's words kept echoing in her mind, a cruel reminder of the nightmare she couldn't escape. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we couldn't save the baby." A sob escaped her lips as she clutched her stomach, wishing she could turn back time. If she had never married James, if she had never loved a man who never cared for her, maybe things would have been different. A warm, steady presence sat beside her, and she turned her head slightly to see Kingsley Donald watching her with an unreadable expression. He had been the one who saved her, rushing her to the hospital when James had walked away without a second glance. She had no idea who he was, but he had shown her more kindness in a few hours than her husband had in years. "You should rest," Kingsley said gently, his voice steady but laced with concern. Rita shook her head. "How can I rest when I've lost everything?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. Kingsley hesitated before speaking, his gaze never leaving her face. "You haven't lost everything, Rita," he said firmly. "You lost a child, and that pain will never go away, but you are still here. You still have a future, one that doesn't include a man who treated you like dirt." His words hit her like a wave, filling her with emotions she couldn't process. Was there really a future for her beyond James? Beyond the misery she had endured? At that moment, she wasn't sure, but one thing was clear, she could no longer stay in the life that had destroyed her. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but this time, they weren't just for her baby. They were for herself, for all the years she had wasted, for the love she had given to a man who never deserved it. She had been blinded by hope, by the belief that James would change, but now, she saw the truth. He had killed the last bit of love she had for him the moment he left her bleeding on the ground. And for that, she would never forgive him. The day Rita was discharged from the hospital, she made a decision: she would never return to James. There was nothing left for her in that house, no love, no safety, only memories of betrayal and heartbreak. With nowhere to go, she packed the few belongings she had managed to gather over the years, stuffing them into a small suitcase. Every piece of clothing reminded her of the life she was leaving behind, a life filled with pain and regret. She had given everything to that marriage, and in return, she had been discarded like trash. As she stepped out of the hospital, the cool evening breeze brushed against her skin, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. Kingsley was waiting by his car, his sharp eyes watching her closely. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Rita swallowed hard. She had no idea. She had no family, no friends to turn to. James had isolated her so much that she had no one to run to in her darkest moment. For a brief second, panic settled in her chest, but then Kingsley spoke again. "If you need a place to stay, I can help." Rita hesitated. Accepting help from a stranger felt dangerous, but what choice did she have? She looked into Kingsley's eyes, searching for any sign of deceit, but all she saw was sincerity. He wasn't pitying her. He was offering her something no one ever had, a fresh start. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "Okay." Kingsley gave a small nod before opening the car door for her. As she slid into the seat, she felt something unexpected, relief. For the first time in years, she was leaving James behind, and with every mile the car drove away from her past, a part of her soul began to heal. As they drove in silence, Rita let her mind wander. Would James even care that she was gone? Would he realize what he had lost, or would he simply move on with Victoria, pretending she had never existed? The thought of him laughing with Victoria while she suffered made her sick, but she quickly pushed it away. James was no longer her concern. He had made his choice, and now, she was making hers. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she was ready to find out. Back at the house Rita once called home, James and Victoria celebrated. They drank expensive wine, toasting to their newfound freedom. She finally left, Victoria laughed, lounging on the couch in a silk robe. That woman was such a burden. James smirked, pouring himself another glass. She should have left a long time ago. Now, I can finally enjoy my life without her pathetic face around. They clinked their glasses together, reveling in their cruelty. James didn't feel even a hint of remorse. In his mind, Rita had been nothing but dead weight, a weak woman who had begged for his love. Now that she was gone, he could focus all his attention on Victoria, the woman he truly wanted. "We should go on a trip," Victoria suggested, running her fingers down his chest. "Just the two of us, to celebrate." James grinned, loving the idea. "Anywhere you want, baby," he said, pulling her close. But fate had a way of turning the tables. While James basked in his temporary happiness, he failed to realize that he had just lost the only person who ever truly loved him. He had thrown away a woman who had been willing to endure everything for him, and soon, he would regret it. Victoria, the woman he had chosen, wasn't who he thought she was. And in time, her true nature would be revealed. As they continued their night of celebration, completely unaware of what was to come, Rita sat in Kingsley's car, watching the city lights blur past her window. She was no longer the weak woman who had once clung to James' love. She was free now, and this was only the beginning of her transformation. Rita sat in the passenger seat of Kingsley's car, her mind clouded with exhaustion and uncertainty. The past few days had been the worst of her life, and now she had nowhere to go. But Kingsley, the man who had saved her, had promised to help. He wasn't just offering her a ride. He was offering her a new beginning. When the car pulled up in front of a beautiful apartment complex, Rita hesitated. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is your new home," Kingsley replied, stepping out of the car. She followed him inside, her legs feeling heavy with disbelief. The apartment was fully furnished, modern yet cozy. It was a place she could have only dreamed of, a stark contrast to the cold, loveless house she had just left. Kingsley handed her a set of keys and a small envelope. "I've taken care of the rent for a year. You'll also find some money inside. It should help you get back on your feet." Rita's eyes widened in shock. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice filled with emotion. "Because you deserve better," Kingsley said simply. Tears welled in Rita's eyes as she clutched the keys in her trembling hands. No one had ever shown her such kindness. She had spent years giving everything to a man who never appreciated her, and yet, here was a stranger offering her a second chance. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to hold back her tears. Kingsley gave her a reassuring nod. "Rest for now. If you need anything, call me." With that, he left, leaving Rita standing in the middle of her new home, overwhelmed by a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. For the first time in years, she felt safe. But even as she lay down on the soft bed, exhaustion pulling her into sleep, the pain of losing her baby still lingered in her heart. She had survived, but at what cost? As she drifted off, one thought echoed in her mind: she would never let any man treat her the way James had ever again. The following weeks were a period of slow healing for Rita. Every day, Kingsley checked on her, bringing food, ensuring she had everything she needed. At first, she found it hard to accept his kindness. After all, she had spent so long being treated as worthless. But as time passed, she began to trust him. He never pressured her, never asked for anything in return. He simply wanted to see her well. One evening, as they sat on the apartment's balcony, sipping tea, Kingsley turned to her with a gentle smile. "You seem stronger," he said. Rita exhaled, looking out at the city lights. "I still have a long way to go," she admitted. "But for the first time, I feel like I have control over my life." Kingsley nodded. "That's the most important thing. You're not just healing from James, you're rediscovering yourself." Their conversations grew deeper, and soon, Rita found herself looking forward to Kingsley's visits. He had a way of making her feel seen, valued, things she had never felt with James. They talked about everything, from childhood dreams to life's disappointments. With every conversation, Rita felt a wall within her slowly breaking down. She wasn't just a woman recovering from heartbreak, she was a person with dreams, emotions, and a future. One day, Kingsley surprised her with an idea. "Why don't you start a small business?" he suggested. "Something that gives you purpose." Rita hesitated. "I wouldn't even know where to start." Kingsley smiled. "You're stronger than you think, Rita. And I'll help you." It was a simple conversation, but it planted a seed in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild her life from scratch. Meanwhile, in the mansion Rita had once called home, James Kenneth was living in bliss, or so he thought. Victoria, now visibly pregnant, had fully taken Rita's place. She lounged in expensive dresses, spent his money freely, and enjoyed the luxurious life she had always wanted. James, blinded by his infatuation, saw her as the perfect woman, believing he had finally rid himself of the burden that was Rita. One evening, James and Victoria attended an exclusive party at a high-end hotel. James relished the attention, showing off his mistress like a prized possession. "You made the right choice, babe," Victoria purred, leaning into him. Rita was pathetic. James smirked, sipping his whiskey. "She was holding me back. Now, I have everything I need." But even as he said the words, a strange feeling crept into his chest, an emptiness he couldn't explain. As the night wore on, James found himself distracted. He thought about Rita, but not in the way he used to. He remembered the way she used to take care of him, the way she had looked at him with love, even when he had given her none in return. A bitter taste filled his mouth. Had he really made the right choice? He shook off the thought, focusing on Victoria, who was laughing loudly at something another man had said. Victoria, however, was growing bored. She had gotten what she wanted, wealth, status, but James no longer excited her. He was too easy, too predictable. As she sipped her champagne, her mind wandered to a secret she had been keeping. Her baby wasn't James. It was Desmond's. And soon, the truth would come out, shattering James' illusion of happiness forever. Days turned into weeks, and cracks began forming in James and Victoria's so-called perfect relationship. At first, it was subtle: Victoria's growing disinterest, her dismissive attitude, the way she spoke to him with less affection. But soon, it became undeniable. She spent more time on her phone, took long trips without explanation, and even started making financial demands that irritated James. One evening, as James entered their bedroom, he noticed Victoria on the phone, laughing flirtatiously. When she saw him, she quickly ended the call. "Who was that?" James asked, narrowing his eyes. Victoria rolled her eyes. "Why are you suddenly interested in who I talk to?" she snapped. "Are you feeling insecure?" Her words stung, and for the first time, James felt the sting of disrespect, the same way he had once treated Rita over dinner. The tension thickened. "Victoria, I've been noticing changes in you," James said, trying to control his temper. "You're acting differently." Victoria scoffed, setting her fork down. "Maybe I'm just tired of being controlled. You got rid of Rita for me, and now you want to control me too?" James clenched his jaw. He had thought life with Victoria would be perfect, but it was beginning to feel like a mistake. That night, as Victoria slept soundly beside him, James lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, regret began creeping into his mind. Rita had loved him, endured his cruelty, and never once disrespected him. And he had thrown her away for this, a woman who was slowly revealing herself to be everything he had feared. Victoria's arrogance grew with each passing day. She no longer made an effort to pretend she was the loving partner James had imagined. Instead, she demanded more money, spent less time with him, and barely acknowledged his presence. James noticed the shift, but he still clung to the belief that he had won, that choosing Victoria over Rita had been the right decision. But that illusion came crashing down the day a stranger walked into his office unannounced. The man, tall and well-dressed, strode confidently inside, ignoring James' secretary's protests. His presence alone exuded authority, and when he spoke, his voice carried a chilling certainty. "My name is Desmond," he said, dropping into the chair opposite James. "I came here to claim what's mine." James frowned, his patience already wearing thin. "And what exactly is yours?" Desmond smirked, pulling a photograph from his pocket and sliding it across the desk. James picked it up, his eyes widening in shock. It was a picture of Victoria and Desmond, wrapped in an intimate embrace. James felt his breath hitch. His grip on the photograph tightened as Desmond continued. "That baby she's carrying? It's mine. Not yours." The words hit like a wrecking ball, shattering every lie Victoria had ever told him. The woman he had destroyed his marriage for had been deceiving him all along. "You're lying," James growled, his hands clenching into fists. Desmond only chuckled, leaning forward. "You know I'm not. But don't take my word for it. Demand a DNA test when the baby arrives, if you can stomach the truth." With that, Desmond stood, straightened his suit, and walked out, leaving James drowning in the storm of his own making. That evening, James stormed into the mansion, his face dark with rage. Victoria was lounging on the couch, painting her nails, completely unbothered. When she saw his expression, she sighed dramatically. "What now?" she drawled. James flung the photograph at her, his voice dangerously low. "Who is Desmond?" At first, Victoria's eyes flickered with panic, but she quickly recovered, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please. Is that what's got you so worked up?" James wasn't in the mood for her games. "Tell me the truth, Victoria. Is that baby mine?" Silence filled the room. Victoria's smug expression faltered for the first time, and James felt his heart sink. "You've already guessed the answer," she finally said, standing up. "So why ask me?" The casual way she admitted her deception sent a cold shiver down his spine. "You ruined my marriage for a child that isn't even mine?" James' voice was hoarse, filled with something he hadn't felt in years, regret. Victoria sighed, crossing her arms. "Ruined your marriage? You ruined it yourself. I never forced you to treat Rita like garbage. That was all you." James stepped back as the truth hit him hard. He had been so blinded by lust and arrogance that he had destroyed the one person who truly loved him. He had chosen a mirage over something real, and now he was left with nothing but regret. "Get out," James finally said, his voice cold. Victoria smirked. "Gladly. Desmond will take care of me anyway." She picked up her purse and walked out without a second glance, leaving James standing there, lost in the wreckage of his own making. As the days passed, James struggled to process everything. He had lost his wife, lost his child, and now, even the woman he thought he loved had humiliated him. He replayed every cruel thing he had ever done to Rita, every insult, every cold look, every time he had chosen Victoria over her. The weight of his mistakes pressed heavily on his chest. He had taken Rita's love for granted, believing she would always be there, but now she was gone, and she wasn't coming back. Desperate to escape his own thoughts, James threw himself into his work, but nothing satisfied him. The house felt empty without Rita's quiet presence, without the warmth she had once brought. The meals the chef prepared tasted bland, the luxury that once excited him now felt meaningless. For the first time, he understood what true loneliness felt like. But more than that, he understood regret, the kind that gnawed at him, the kind that whispered in his ear that he had destroyed his own happiness with his own hands. One night, he found himself scrolling through his phone, searching for Rita's number. But then he remembered, she had blocked him. The realization hit him hard. She had truly cut him out of her life. He had never imagined a day where Rita would stop loving him, but now, that day had come. He had broken her beyond repair, and now, he was the one left shattered. As he sat in the darkness of his empty mansion, James made a decision. He had to find Rita. He had to beg for her forgiveness, to make things right. He wasn't sure if she would ever take him back, but he had to try. Even if she never loved him again, he needed her to know he was sorry. James hired private investigators to find Rita, but they returned with unexpected news. She had moved on. Not just emotionally, but physically. She was living in a beautiful apartment, thriving, and worst of all, she wasn't alone. The reports mentioned a man, Kingsley Donald. A powerful billionaire. A man who had stepped in when James had pushed Rita away. A man who was treating her the way she had deserved all along. James couldn't believe it. Rita, his Rita, was with another man. The thought filled him with an unbearable mix of jealousy and despair. He had thought he could win her back, but now he wasn't even sure if she would look at him again. Still, he had to try. He had to see her, to tell her the truth, to beg her for another chance. Determined, he drove to her apartment one evening, his heart pounding in his chest. He knocked on the door, half hoping she would answer, half terrified of what he would see. The door opened, and there she stood, Rita. She looked different, stronger. Her once sad, tired eyes now held a quiet confidence. But before he could speak, another figure appeared behind her, Kingsley. He placed a protective hand on her shoulder, his eyes cold as he looked at James. James felt his heart drop. Rita was no longer his, and for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to lose something truly irreplaceable. Rita looked at James with an expression he had never seen before, calm indifference. There was no trace of the woman who used to cry for his love, no hint of the desperation he had once taken for granted. Instead, she stood tall beside Kingsley, a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ashes of heartbreak. James swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. "Rita, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Kingsley's grip on Rita's shoulder tightened slightly, a silent show of support. Rita didn't look away from James, but there was no emotion in her gaze. "There's nothing to talk about, James," she said firmly. "Whatever you have to say, it's too late." Her words cut through him like a blade. He had expected anger, maybe even hatred, but this quiet detachment, hurt more than he could have imagined. "Rita, please," he pleaded, stepping forward, but Kingsley moved in front of her, a clear warning that James was no longer welcome in her life. "You need to leave," Kingsley said coldly, his eyes dark with unspoken warnings. James clenched his fists, feeling powerless for the first time in his life. He had always believed he was in control, but now, he was just a desperate man trying to reclaim what he had thrown away. Rita sighed, shaking her head. "James, I forgave you a long time ago, not for your sake, but for mine. Holding on to the pain would have only destroyed me. But that doesn't mean I'll ever take you back." Her voice was steady, final. "I've moved on. You should too." James felt his chest tighten, but he knew there was nothing left to say. He had lost her. Truly, completely. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his heart heavier than it had ever been. As he reached his car, he looked back one last time, watching as Kingsley pulled Rita into a warm embrace. And for the first time, James understood. She was happy, and he would never be part of that happiness again. For the first time in a long while, Rita felt peace settle in her heart. Living in the beautiful apartment Kingsley had rented for her, she slowly embraced the kindness and warmth he offered. Each morning, she woke up feeling lighter, no longer burdened by James' cruelty or Victoria's mockery. Kingsley visited her often, ensuring she had everything she needed. He would bring her groceries, help her decorate the house, and even take her out for walks when he noticed she had been indoors for too long. His care was gentle and sincere, something Rita had never truly experienced in her marriage. One evening, Kingsley invited her to a quiet dinner at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. The golden lights of Lagos shimmered below them as they sat together, enjoying the cool breeze. "I hope you know how strong you are," Kingsley said, looking at her intently. "You've been through so much, yet you still stand with grace." Rita lowered her gaze, emotions welling up inside her. "I never thought I would feel happy again," she admitted. "After losing my baby, after everything James put me through, I thought I was broken beyond repair." Kingsley reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You are not broken, Rita. You are a survivor." As the days turned into weeks, Rita found herself smiling more, laughing more, and slowly rediscovering the parts of herself she had lost in her miserable marriage. She took up new hobbies, including baking, something she had always loved but never had the chance to fully explore. Kingsley encouraged her to start a small business, promising to support her in any way he could. For the first time, Rita felt like she was in control of her own life. She no longer lived under someone else's shadow, no longer felt like a burden or an afterthought. With Kingsley's unwavering support, she was beginning to see herself as a woman worthy of love, happiness, and success. One afternoon, as Rita sat on her balcony, sipping tea and watching the world go by, she realized something profound. She no longer thought about James with sadness. The pain he had caused her was still a part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She had moved on, not because she wanted revenge, but because she deserved better. And for the first time, she was ready to embrace the beautiful future that awaited her. James could barely sleep at night. The realization of his mistakes tormented him like a recurring nightmare, refusing to let him rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Rita's tear-streaked face the day she lost their baby. He had been a fool, a blind and arrogant man who had cast aside the one person who had truly loved him. Now, she was gone, and no matter how much he wanted to undo his mistakes, he knew some wounds never healed. He tried reaching out to her, but she had blocked his number. Even when he drove to her former home, the security guards informed him she no longer lived there. The sting of rejection was unbearable, but he deserved it. Desperate, James hired a private investigator to find out where Rita had gone. When he finally received the report, his heart clenched. She was with Kingsley Donald, the billionaire who had saved her. James couldn't believe it. How had he not realized Kingsley was involved all along? The thought of another man protecting Rita, caring for her the way he never did, drove him to the edge. The investigator even provided photos of them together, Rita smiling, looking radiant in a way she never had with him. It was a painful sight. His fists clenched as he stared at the images, but deep down, he knew he had no right to be angry. She deserved happiness, and he had given her nothing but misery. Still, James wasn't ready to let go. One night, in his drunken state, he found himself outside Kingsley's mansion, staring up at the grand estate. He wanted to march inside and demand to see Rita, to tell her he had changed, that he was ready to be a better man. But when he saw Kingsley step outside, his hand gently resting on Rita's waist as they laughed together, he knew it was too late. He had lost her, and there was nothing he could do about it. Swallowing his pride, he turned and walked away, realizing that his desperation meant nothing. Rita had moved on. While James wallowed in regret, Victoria's life took an even darker turn. After James had thrown her out, she had run to Desmond, expecting him to take her in. She had always believed she could manipulate men into giving her whatever she wanted, but this time, she had miscalculated. Desmond was furious when he found out she had tried to pass off his child as James. "You disgust me," he spat, his face twisted in anger. "Did you really think I would accept you after what you did?" Victoria, stunned by his reaction, tried to plead with him, but Desmond was done. He wanted nothing to do with her or the baby. For the first time, Victoria felt real fear. She had been so sure she could secure a future with either James or Desmond, but now, both had rejected her. With nowhere to go, she turned to her so-called friends, the same women who had cheered her on when she was living in luxury. But they wanted nothing to do with her now. Without money or status, she was just another woman struggling to survive. Her once glamorous life crumbled before her eyes. Forced to move into a tiny, run-down apartment, Victoria faced the harsh reality of her choices. She had laughed at Rita when she lost everything, mocking her suffering, but now, karma had dealt her the same fate. Except, unlike Rita, she had no one to help her. No Kingsley, no friends, no family willing to take her in. She was truly alone. Sitting on the cold floor of her small room, she broke down in tears, realizing too late that she had destroyed her own future. James had always been a man who prided himself on his wealth and power, but now, both felt meaningless. His home, once filled with extravagant parties and laughter, was now silent. Even his business, which he had built with ruthless ambition, no longer brought him joy. Everywhere he turned, he saw ghosts of his past mistakes. The bed felt empty without Rita beside him. The dining table, once a place where he barely acknowledged her presence, now felt unbearable without her sitting there. He had spent years believing that love was a weakness, that a man's worth was measured by his status and success. But now, as he sat in his empty mansion, he realized that love was the one thing he had needed all along. And he had thrown it away. He tried to distract himself with work, but even that couldn't erase the memories of Rita's gentle smile, the warmth she had once brought into his life. He longed for a second chance, but deep down, he knew it was too late. One evening, he found himself scrolling through social media, his heart sinking as he saw a post from Kingsley's company. It was a photo of Rita, looking stunning and confident, standing beside Kingsley at an event. The caption read, "New beginnings. A future filled with love and success." James stared at the words, feeling a deep emptiness settle in his chest. Rita had truly moved on. She was no longer his. And the realization was more painful than anything he had ever experienced. While James drowned in regret, Rita's life flourished like never before. With Kingsley's support, she finally pursued her dream of starting her own business. It had always been a silent passion of hers, something she never had the confidence to chase when she was with James. But Kingsley believed in her, and that belief gave her the strength to take the first step. Together, they launched a luxury fashion line, and within months, it became one of the fastest-growing brands in the industry. For the first time, Rita felt truly in control of her life. She was no longer the timid woman begging for love from a man who never valued her. She was successful, confident, and most importantly, happy. Kingsley stood by her every step of the way, celebrating her victories and supporting her dreams. He wasn't just a lover, he was a partner in every sense of the word. One day, as she looked around at her thriving business, Rita felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had been through so much pain, but in the end, it had led her here, to a life filled with love and purpose. She no longer thought about James with bitterness. He was just a chapter of her past, one that had taught her the most important lesson of all: she was worth so much more than the love he never gave her. And for the first time in her life, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Kingsley had always admired Rita's strength, but as he watched her thrive, his admiration deepened into something more profound. He had known from the moment he met her that she was special, but now, seeing her flourish in both business and life, he realized he had fallen completely in love with her. Rita, too, felt something growing within her. Kingsley was everything she had ever wanted in a partner: kind, patient, and supportive. Unlike James, he didn't try to control or belittle her. He encouraged her to chase her dreams and reminded her every day how valuable she was. One evening, Kingsley took Rita to a private dinner at a luxurious rooftop restaurant overlooking the city skyline. The view was breathtaking, but nothing compared to the way Kingsley looked at her. As they ate, he reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "Rita," he said softly, "I don't ever want to spend another day without you. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." Tears welled in Rita's eyes as she realized how much this man had changed her life. Before she could respond, Kingsley got down on one knee, pulling out a dazzling diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. Rita's heart pounded as she stared at him. For years, she had believed love was meant to hurt, that it was something she had to beg for. But Kingsley had shown her otherwise. He had given her love freely, without conditions or cruelty. With happy tears streaming down her face, she nodded. "Yes, Kingsley. 1,000 times, yes." The restaurant erupted in applause as Kingsley slid the ring onto her finger. For the first time in her life, Rita felt truly cherished. This was love. Real love. The news of Rita's engagement spread quickly, and when James heard about it, he felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. He had known she was moving on, but seeing her about to marry another man shattered the last remnants of his pride. Desperation took hold of him, and he made a reckless decision: he had to stop the wedding. He couldn't let Rita slip away forever. That night, he drank heavily, convincing himself that he could win her back. On the day of Rita and Kingsley's engagement party, James showed up uninvited. Dressed in a suit, but reeking of alcohol and regret, he stormed into the grand ballroom where guests had gathered to celebrate. Gasps filled the room as he marched toward Rita, his eyes filled with desperation. "Rita," he said, his voice shaking. "Please, don't do this. Don't marry him." Kingsley immediately stepped forward, placing a protective arm around Rita, his eyes cold with warning. But James ignored him, focusing only on the woman he had once taken for granted. "I was wrong," James pleaded, his voice breaking. "I treated you terribly, and I will never forgive myself. But please, give me another chance. I love you, Rita. I always have." The entire room fell silent, all eyes on Rita as she stared at James, the man who had caused her so much pain. Once, she would have given anything to hear those words. But now, they meant nothing. She took a deep breath and spoke with unwavering strength. "James," she said, her voice steady, "you only love me now because you lost me. But I have moved on. I deserve happiness, and that happiness is with Kingsley." James fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He had truly lost her. "Rita, please," he whispered, but she shook her head. There was no going back. The room remained silent as Rita turned to Kingsley, her eyes filled with love. "Let's go," she said softly. Kingsley didn't hesitate. He guided her away from James, away from the past that had once broken her. James could only watch as she walked out of his life forever. The moment was bittersweet for Rita. She had once thought she would never heal from James' cruelty, but standing there with Kingsley, she realized that she was no longer a victim of her past. She had built a new life, one filled with love and respect. And she refused to let her past dictate her future. That night, as she and Kingsley sat together, she felt at peace. "Are you okay?" Kingsley asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Rita smiled. "For the first time in a long time, yes. I'm finally free." James, on the other hand, returned home to an empty house, drowning in the reality of his loneliness. The weight of his mistakes crushed him, but it was too late. He had lost the only woman who had ever truly loved him. And there was nothing he could do to change it. He had spent years believing he was untouchable, but now, he realized he was just a man who had let go of his greatest blessing. Rita's wedding day was nothing short of magical. The grand hall was adorned with golden chandeliers, fresh white roses, and silk drapes, exuding elegance and luxury. Guests filled the venue, eagerly waiting to witness the union of Rita and Kingsley. As Rita stood in front of the mirror, dressed in a breathtaking white gown, she felt emotions overwhelm her. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined herself here, marrying a man who truly loved her. Kingsley had been her rock, her comfort, and her greatest blessing. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, her heart pounding with excitement. As she walked down the aisle, escorted by Kingsley's closest friend, the entire room stood in awe. Murmurs of admiration spread through the guests, marveling at how beautiful and radiant she looked. Kingsley, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, watched her approach with nothing but pure adoration in his eyes. He had waited for this moment, and now, it was finally happening. When Rita reached him, he took her hands gently, his touch warm and reassuring. "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. The ceremony proceeded, and when it was time for their vows, Kingsley spoke with sincerity. "Rita, from the moment I met you, I knew you were special. You are strong, kind, and resilient, and I promise to cherish and protect you for the rest of my life." Tears streamed down Rita's cheeks as she smiled. "Kingsley, you showed me what love truly is. You healed my wounds and made me believe in happiness again. I vow to love you forever." With those words, the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Kingsley leaned in, kissing her deeply as the guests erupted in applause. The reception was just as grand, filled with music, dancing, and laughter. Rita twirled in Kingsley's arms as they danced their first dance as husband and wife. She had once believed happiness was beyond her reach, but now, she was living in a dream. She glanced at the entrance briefly and, for a split second, thought she saw James standing in the shadows, watching. But she shook the thought away. The past no longer had a hold on her. This was her new beginning, and she was ready to embrace it completely. James had indeed been there, lurking at the entrance of the wedding venue, hidden in the shadows. He had convinced himself that he wouldn't go, that it wouldn't matter, but he couldn't resist. Seeing Rita in her wedding dress, glowing with happiness, made him realize just how deeply he had lost her. She had been his wife, a woman who once loved him with all her heart, and he had thrown it all away for a lie. Now, she belonged to another man, a man who had given her everything James failed to. As he stood outside, hidden from view, memories of their past came rushing back. He remembered the nights Rita had waited for him to come home, only to be met with his cold indifference. He remembered the way she had looked at him with hope in her eyes, only for him to crush it with his cruelty. He had laughed at her pain, dismissed her tears, and now, he was the one drowning in misery. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had pushed her away, and now, he would never get her back. James walked away, feeling empty. He had no one left. Victoria had betrayed him, Desmond had taken everything from him, and now, Rita had moved on to a life he could never be part of. He returned to his empty house, filled with silence and regret. He poured himself a drink, staring at Rita's wedding pictures online, each one stabbing at his heart. He had once believed he would never need her, that she was beneath him. Now, he realized she was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and he had lost her forever. The next morning, James woke up with a pounding headache and an overwhelming sense of loneliness. His phone was filled with business emails, but none of them mattered. Nothing mattered anymore. His life had become meaningless without Rita. He had spent years taking her for granted, thinking she would always be there. But she wasn't. She had moved on, and he was left with nothing but his mistakes. He had destroyed his own happiness, and now, he had to live with the consequences. 2 years later, Rita and Kingsley's life was filled with joy. They had built a beautiful home together, and Rita's business was thriving. She had finally found her purpose, not just as a wife but as a woman who had reclaimed her power. One afternoon, as she sat in their garden, watching her 1-year-old daughter giggle in Kingsley's arms, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This was the life she had always deserved. She had gone through pain, heartbreak, and betrayal, but in the end, she had found happiness again. Kingsley kissed her forehead, wrapping his arms around her. "I love you, Mrs. Donald," he said playfully. She smiled, leaning into him. "And I love you, Mr. Donald." They had built something beautiful together, a love that was unbreakable. As their daughter ran toward them, giggling, Rita scooped her up, holding her close. She had once feared she would never be a mother, but now, she had been blessed beyond measure. Meanwhile, James had disappeared from society's view. Some said he had left the country, unable to face the life he had ruined for himself. Others claimed he had turned to alcohol, drowning in his misery. But to Rita, it didn't matter anymore. He was part of her past, and she had long let go of the pain he had caused. She had forgiven him, not for his sake, but for hers. She refused to let bitterness control her. As the sun set, Rita sat with Kingsley, watching their daughter play. She had finally found peace, love, and happiness. And this time, she knew she would never lose it. Because she had learned the most important lesson: she was always worthy of love, and no one could take that away from her ever again. She had won. That's the end of the story. What did you learn about the story? Please leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories. Thanks for watching.